We are here with Representative Nate Davidson. You've recently proposed pieces of legislation about the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse survivors. For those who may not be familiar, what is a statute of limitations?
Well, thanks, Ellen, for having me on today. So the statute of limitations, basically it is the end period for when you can bring either criminal charges in a criminal case or civil charges, a civil suit in court. Typically, it's age-related. So previously, the statute of limitations in this context was 30 years. Back in 2019, they raised that to 55. So currently, it's at 55. And after, the victim of an alleged crime in the criminal case or a civil suit for non-criminal harm or criminal harm related, I'm not an attorney, so please. After that, they pass that age, they're no longer able to bring a suit. So that limits the statute and its applicability.
How would your legislation change this?
So this piece of legislation, in particular for the survivors of childhood sexual abuse, has been around the Capitol building for many years. In fact, it's one of the only items of memory that has been voted upon so many times in such overwhelming numbers, but still hasn't gotten completely across the finish line. There's a lot of reasons for that, but all that being said, this bill is not new to the Capitol building. And what it would do is it would provide a 2-year window for those individuals who are outside of the statute of limitations, so in this case, older than 55, to bring a civil suit against their perpetrator and or the institution where they were abused. And we open this window to give those individuals who are outside the statute, one opportunity to seek justice in the court. If we were successful, I'm sure many would, others may not. But it would just provide that 2-year window, and then after that 2 years, that window would close, and the statute would remain at 55 going forward.
What inspired you to create this legislation?
So I've been a staffer in the Capitol building for many years, and I've seen this piece of legislation go through the process. Again, it's been frustrating to watch it because it's had so many successful votes in both chambers throughout the years, and there were so many missed opportunities to get it completed finally. And for me, as a new legislator, I wanted to make sure that the retiring member who previously carried this legislation, and wasn't able to get it all the way across the finish line, that it didn't just go by the wayside. It's an important issue. There's a population of survivors of childhood sexual abuse who deserve their day in court. And I wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost in the shuffle of the Capitol building. And so I'm hopeful that we're able to do something this session, and we'll see where that goes.
Your memo for this bill mentions Act 87 of 2019 multiple times. How is this legislation connected to yours? Right,
so that was the act that raised the statute from 30 to 55 for the civil suits. It also lifted the cap on criminal suits or criminal cases. There is no cap anymore, so it totally removed the statute of limitations in that case. So that's why I referenced the law, and that was a part of this overall effort. And some may remember the constitutional amendment process takes multiple sessions to get through. And part of that back in 2019 was they advanced the statutory process for the statute of limitations criminally and civilly. But then alongside that, they moved the constitutional process for the window. So the statutory change was there, but this window process has been stalled for a variety of reasons. And so, hoping to just continue that to carry the banner.
Do you think that expanding the amount of time that somebody will be able to punish their sexual predator will dissuade people from committing sexual crimes?
I think many in the survivor community, I don't speak for everyone, I don't know if people view it as punishment or, retribution, though some may. For some, it's just the opportunity to seek justice in the court of law, even just as simple as finding in a court that this happened to them. So there's many reasons why individuals who are survivors would want to or want not to pursue a legal case. That's up to the individuals, But for me, I don't think the government should be, closing the door for their access to the justice system. It's no different for me than the government denying a business license to someone just because it was too long ago that they applied. I don't think the government should be getting in the way of that situation, just like I don't think it should be getting in the way in this situation.
You mentioned being new to the State House, and you were just elected in November, and this was one of your very first bills that you proposed. Why do you feel like this topic needed to take priority out of all of your other legislative ideas?
Well, so the legislature in the previous session did not advance a constitutional amendment again through the process, and so voters were denied the opportunity to vote on it on the ballot. And what happened was that reset the clock. So now we have to go through 2 consecutive legislations, passing an amendment language, that is identical between this session and next session. And again, given the history of this legislation, I didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle of the building. So I just felt it was important that these survivors and victims, that they're not lost in the Capitol building. I had great relationships with the prior member who carried this legislation as well. So, that relationship, this importance of the issue was one of the reasons I wanted to be, in front on it.
Representative Mays and Miller are each co-sponsoring one of the 2 bills you had about this. How did they get involved?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. They've both been passionate on this issue in the past in prior sessions. Representative Miller and Representative Mays, both from Allegheny County. They've both spoken on this issue previously. I know Representative Mays has shared a story of her own experience on the House floor in the public sphere. They've both been outspoken advocates on this issue, and in my conversations with them leading into this legislative session, they were, kind enough to let me take the lead, but also, have my back and be supporters of the legislation as well.
What have your other colleagues in the House said about this bill?
Well, again, it's well known, and most people are just frustrated by the process and how it's gotten jammed up so many times for, again, a variety of reasons. There was, a clerical error in the Wolf administration previously, and in last session, it got drawn down by partisanship and polarization in the Capitol building. So, there's a lot of reasons why it hasn't gotten across the finish line, but for me, ultimately falls back at the feet of the General Assembly. It is on us to get this done for these survivors. And so, we should continue the fight. We should continue to press forward. And ultimately, we're fighting for the survivors here. It's not about any one particular institution. It's not about one particular perpetrator. This issue is about the survivors. And I think that's something everybody in the Capitol building can get around. The proof's in the pudding. It's been voted upon so many times, over and over again, overwhelming support. And I just think it's plain and simple to me.
Where is this bill in the legislative process currently?
Yeah, right now it's in the Judiciary Committee. That's where most bills of this nature will go. We would need to have a hearing for the constitutional amendment, and I'll be clear, I have both the statutory version and a constitutional version. So there's 2 versions of this bill. The statutory, we could pass that in the House and the Senate and put it in front of the governor this spring. There are some folks who have questions about the statutory pathway for this legislation. Though I'll note, our neighbors to the south in Maryland, their state Supreme Court just upheld a statutory change and reaffirmed the legislature's authority to set the statute as they see. There are those in Pennsylvania who may have a different view, and I understand that. However, the constitutional process, that takes 2 sessions. That bill is running concurrently. So we would need to have a hearing for that one, as well as a vote in the House and the Senate this session, and then do that again in the 27-28 legislative session.
Can you explain a little bit of the difference between the statutory and the constitutional legislation? Yeah,
statute is laws that are passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. With over time, various forms of the legislative body, the General Assembly, can amend or edit prior statutes. They can add to them, subtract from them. Whereas a constitutional amendment, that goes in front of the voters for their approval. And if they do approve, and every constitutional memo that's been proposed to the voters has been approved historically, that goes in our Constitution. That is not something that the legislature can change. It's immutable going forward. Obviously we could re-amend it and undo it, but that would again require the support of the voters. But it's a more immutable place in the Constitution as opposed to the statute, which could be changed through the normal statutory process in the legislature in the future.
You've mentioned this bill being around for many years. What do you think has changed from when the bill was first proposed to now that may affect its going through the process?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it was first introduced back 2013, I believe, one significant change between then and now was the grand jury report that came out in 2018. From then Attorney General Shapiro, was responsible for producing that report and sharing it with the public. And there were some pretty intense stories in that report. Ultimately, the next year was when the legislature took action. On the statutory front, it moved forward. Constitutional front, it was bogged down. I think the experience last session with this issue getting tied in with partisanship and other, chamber priorities from the House or the Senate, it got tied into a partisan Gordian knot, if you will. And, for me, moving forward, my goal is to kind of release the tension here, turn the volume down. It reflects poorly on our institution when we do something so many times and we agree and it still isn't done. We need to be sure that we are instilling faith in the voters and the constituents and Pennsylvanians who sent us here to represent them, that, we can be effective at what we do. So I'm hoping to turn the volume down, just approach this as a common sense issue, something that we've done before, which should be done now. There's no reason preventing us from getting it across the finish line, unless we want to go down that partisan pathway again, or unless we want to, fall prey again to a clerical error. We need to put our minds to this issue and just get it off of our plates and done finally. Provide that pathway for the survivors to seek justice if they so choose, and prove to the Commonwealth that, and the constituents here in the Commonwealth that we can be an effective body.
We're going to switch to another bill that you are involved with. You are co-sponsoring a bill to provide free school meals for all Pennsylvania students. What drew you to this bill?
Oh, this is a great bill. I believe it was 2023 or 2024, you'd have to fact check me on that one, when part of the budget negotiations, we were able to provide free breakfasts for all students in Pennsylvania. Kids can't learn if they're hungry. And it really shouldn't matter the economic background of a student when we're making decisions about whether or not to provide them food so they can learn. So this is a no-brainer for me. And it shouldn't matter the school district, whether you're a top performing or bottom performing, top funded or bottom funded school district. This is just something about the kids, and kids can't learn when they're hungry. So it's a no-brainer for me. We'll see where we go. I mean, obviously all of these types of conversations come down to budget negotiations and finding funding and dedicating it year over year. But it seems like a no-brainer to me, and maybe it'll help the little brains grow a little faster.
So is there any specific criteria financially for what kids can get the free lunch, or is it for everyone?
In my view, there shouldn't be one. But obviously, as we go through the negotiating process for any piece of legislation, other people have different opinions, and that could be one of them. For me, it shouldn't matter, but obviously we'll see where the process goes. If there's budget available, we'll see. But it's an exciting issue.
What part of the budget would the funding for this come from?
No, that's a great question. I did used to work in the Appropriations Committee, but it's been a minute since I've been there, so I'd have to check in with some colleagues who still work there. It would probably be in the same program with the breakfasts. I don't know if that's in the Department of Agriculture or Department of Education. It probably also depends if there's federal funding available for it. So wherever the breakfast program is, I'm sure it would just sit right next door.
Do other states have a free lunch for students?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I do know that I know Minnesota just did free breakfast and lunch a couple of years ago. So yeah, this is not a new idea. Oftentimes we're reminded there are not many new ideas under the sun, but it's a good one and something that we should pursue.
During the pandemic, school lunches were covered. Where did that funding come from?
That was federal funding. Yeah, the federal government supported. That was just part of the pandemic response across the board. I mean, those are interesting times. Another one. Not to talk about other legislation that I have, but another federal program that was set up in that period was the LIHWAP program for low-income individuals and their water utilities. We had the LIHEAP program, which is federally funded for electric and gas utilities, but there isn't something corresponding in the water space. But in the pandemic, this program was federally funded. It was stood up for several years. Well, that funding has gone away. So that's another thing that I'm hoping to do as well. And that's a win-win because it helps not just the customers, but it helps the water utilities at the same time. So that's another one of those federal funding streams that went away, but really highlighted something that we can do to directly impact Pennsylvanians.
Representative Kincaid is the main sponsor of the free school lunch bill and previously introduced it during the 2023-24 session. Why did she feel like now is the time to reintroduce it again?
That's a great question. You'd have to ask Representative Kincaid. I just think it's a great piece of legislation, and I'm excited to be a part of it this session.
The original version of the bill was co-sponsored by over 50 representatives. With such a large number of supporters, what is taking this bill so long?
That's a great question, and we could ask that question about any number of bills. Sometimes, they'll find members will get over 102 co-sponsors, and it still doesn't move. So it's interesting. Oftentimes, those are negotiations around the budget table, whether there's availability of funding. That could be a reason the bill doesn't move. There's inter-caucus disputes, there's inter-chamber disputes, there's inter-branch disputes from the executive or the judiciary. So there's many reasons why a bill, can fall off the rails, so to speak. But the hard work of legislators is to find that one pathway to get that good idea across the finish line.
And where is this bill in the legislature now?
I imagine it's in committee at this time. I haven't heard that it's moved out of committee, and frankly, we've only had 2 session weeks so far because it is the beginning of session. So we really haven't been moving bills out of committee yet, but that's coming. So when we return in mid-March, we'll be in most weeks between now and the budget deadline at the end of June. So that's when I expect our committee process to start kicking out some bills and getting them ready for floor action in May and June.
Lastly, we have been mentioning that this is your first session here in the House. How's that been going?
So far it's been going pretty great. I'm blessed to have a short commute. I am the closest member to the Capitol building, and it is in my district. However, I have my district office up and running in the Cumberland County portion of my district. I have a wonderful staff who works hard every day to serve our constituents, whether it's needs that they have with paperwork or licensing with the Commonwealth, or everything from there's a cat stuck in the tree, who do I call? We've received that one in the very first week, to there's no hot water in our building, what do we do? We're ready to serve our constituents in any way. Sometimes we don't know the answer or we're not the ones who can provide it, but we'll find out who is, and we'll connect you with that person.
You mentioned previously serving as a staffer in the Capitol. Was it a big jump from staffer to elected member?
Oh, yes. It definitely is. Actually, the first day when I returned to the floor, I went to my old seat and realized that wasn't where I sat anymore. So it's definitely a humbling experience. It's a perspective change. But, I can't speak highly enough of the staff in the House of Representatives. They are the people who, make the building work. They are the people who are on the front lines, whether it's with constituent work or negotiating legislation. The legislative staff, they don't get enough credit, and I'll never have enough time in the world to speak highly of them.
Representative Nate Davidson, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate you having me on.